I work the night shift at a morgue in downtown Chicago. And before you ask, yeah, it's as creepy as it sounds. I've been doing this for almost 3 years now. I'm a night owl, and the pay is decent, so it works for me. Plus, it's usually quiet, and I get a lot of reading done. But that night, I was the only one there. My coworker Brian was sick that night, so it was just me and a bunch of dead bodies. The building itself is old, like early 1900s old. Kind of place with those weird, drafty hallways and flickering lights that make you feel like you're in a horror movie. Most of the time I can tune it out, but not that night. I was in the office, filling out some paperwork, when I heard a noise, a thump. It came from the autopsy room. Now, noises aren't unusual in a place like this. Buildings settle, pipes make weird sounds. But this was different. It sounded like something heavy had hit the floor. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the hall. When I got to the autopsy room, I stood outside the door for a second, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just my imagination, right? But then I heard it again. Another thump. My heart was pounding as I pushed open the door. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway lights. I waved my flashlight around, checking the corners, the tables, everywhere. Nothing. Everything was in its place. I was about to chalk it up to my mind playing tricks on me when I saw it. One of the body drawers was slightly open. I swear I closed all of them at the start of my shift. They lock automatically, so there's no way it just popped open on its own. I walked over, my hands shaking, and pulled it open the rest of the way. The body inside, John Doe we found in the river a few days ago, was still there, motionless, just like it should be. I stood there for a minute, staring at it, trying to figure out what could have made that noise. Maybe the drawer wasn't closed properly? I pushed it back in and made sure it locked. Then I heard it again. This time, it was right behind me. A shuffling sound, like someone was dragging their feet across the floor. I whipped around, shining my flashlight in every direction, but there was nothing. No one. Just me in a room full of dead bodies. I backed out of the room, my skin crawling, and headed back to the office. I was done investigating. I just wanted to get through the rest of my shift without losing my mind. Back in the office, I tried to focus on my paperwork. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. A thump, followed by that shuffling noise. This time, it was coming from the hallway outside the office. I didn't want to leave the relative safety of the room, but I also couldn't just sit there and ignore it. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. The hallway was empty. I slowly made my way down, checking each room as I went. When I reached the end of the hall, I found one of the doors slightly ajar. It led to a small storage room where we kept supplies. I nudged it open with my foot and shone the flashlight inside. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the usual shelves of supplies. But then I noticed something on the floor, a smear of something dark and wet. Blood. My stomach turned as I followed the trail with my flashlight. It led to a corner of the room behind a stack of boxes. I moved the boxes aside and almost dropped the flashlight. There, slumped against the wall, was a man. He was pale, his clothes dirty and torn, like he'd been living on the streets. His eyes were wide open, staring straight at me, and his throat was slit. I stumbled back, my mind racing. How did he get in here? Was he the one making the noises? And if he was dead, who or what had killed him? I ran back to the office and called the police. They arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. I led them to the storage room, my hands still shaking. They found the body, just like I said. The police searched the entire building but found no one else. They said it looked like the man had been dead for a few hours, maybe longer. They had no idea how he got in or who killed him. They took my statement and told me to go home, but I couldn't. Not until my shift was over. I spent the rest of the night in the office, with the door locked and my flashlight in hand. By the time my shift ended, I was a nervous wreck. I still don't know what happened that night. The police never found any leads, and the case went cold. I quit the job a week later. I couldn't handle being in that building anymore. Sometimes, I still hear that shuffling noise in my dreams. Believe it if you want, or don't. I work the night shift at a hospital in downtown Seattle. I'm a nurse, been doing this for like 2 years now. dealing with the usual craziness that comes with the ER at night. Drunks, people with weird injuries, stuff like that. But last Friday night was different. Way different. It started off normal. I grabbed my usual iced coffee from the Starbucks near the hospital. Shout out to my barista, Matt, for always getting my order right. I clocked in at, I think, around 11 p.m., ready for another night of whatever came through the doors. The first few hours were standard. A couple of sprained ankles, a guy who tried to deep fry a turkey and ended up burning his hand, and a teenager who thought skateboarding down a steep hill was a good idea. Around 2 a.m., things got weird. We got a call that an ambulance was bringing in an elderly woman who'd had a bad fall. When she arrived, something felt off. Her name was Mrs. Whitaker, and she had this old, tattered notebook clutched in her hand. She wouldn't let it go, even when we tried to examine her. She kept muttering something about the shadows, and they're coming. I was like, okay, creepy. But honestly, we see a lot of weird stuff. We finally managed to get the notebook away from her when she fell asleep after some pain meds. Curiosity got the best of me, so I opened it. The pages were filled with these strange drawings and notes about a creature that lives in the shadows. There were dates and times too, like she'd been tracking something. The last entry was that night's date, with the words, "It's here," scrawled across the page. I showed it to my friend May, another nurse on the shift. She's super into conspiracy theories and paranormal stuff. She was like, "This is some creepy pasta level stuff, but also kind of cool." We laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Around 3 a.m., we started hearing noises, like weird scratching sounds coming from the vents. We thought it was just rats or something, but then the lights started flickering. I went to check on Mrs. Whitaker, and she was awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering, "It's here, it's here." May and I exchanged a look. This was getting too creepy. We decided to check the security cameras, thinking maybe there was a power surge or something. But when we replayed the footage, we saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a shadowy figure moving down the hallway, but it wasn't like a person. It was more like a dark mist, shifting and changing shape. We were both freaking out at this point. May was like, "Maybe we should call someone?" But who do you even call for something like this? Ghostbusters? The scratching noises got louder, and now it sounded like they were coming from the walls all around us. I went back to Mrs. Whitaker's room, and she was sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror. She pointed to the corner of the room and said, "There, it's watching us." I looked, and there was nothing there, but the room felt colder, and I swear to God, I saw a shadow move. May and I decided to stay with Mrs. Whitaker for the rest of the night. We didn't know what else to do. We kept hearing the noises, and the lights kept flickering, but nothing else happened. When morning came in, we were both exhausted and ready to leave. Before I left, I checked on Mrs. Whitaker one last time. She showed me the notebook and said, "You need to know. They're real." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and left. I've been thinking about it all weekend, trying to make sense of it. I even Googled some of the stuff in the notebook that I still remember, but all I found were more creepy stories and conspiracy theories. I don't know if I believe in all that, but something happened that night. Something I can't explain. I've got another shift tonight, and honestly, I'm kind of dreading it. I keep telling myself it was just a weird coincidence, but I can't shake the feeling that Mrs. Whitaker was right. There's something in the shadows, and it's watching us. Has anyone else experienced anything like this during a night shift? Is it just sleep deprivation messing with my head, or is there something more to it? This just happened last night, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I work at a gas station just off I-90 in Washington State graveyard shift, not too far from Spokane. The night shift is usually pretty good. I get paid to listen to music, scroll through my phone, and occasionally sell some snacks or gas. Easy money, right? So, my shift started at 11 p.m. It was just me. Around midnight, this truck pulls in. Out steps this dude, probably in his 50s, looking like he's been on the road for days. He grabs a coffee and comes up to the counter. "Rough night?" I ask, making small talk. He just nods and mumbles something about long drives and bad sleep. Then he heads back to his truck. Normal stuff. But then around 1 a.m., I notice his truck is still there. Weird, but maybe he's just catching some sleep. Fast forward to 2:30 a.m. I'm half watching YouTube videos, half dozing off when I hear a loud noise outside. I jump up, heart racing. Looking out the window, I see the guy from the truck stumbling around. At first, I think he's drunk or something, but then I notice the panic on his face. He's frantically looking around, and it seems like he's talking to someone, but there's no one else there. I grab my phone and step outside, keeping a safe distance. "Hey man, you okay?" I call out. He looks at me, eyes wide and wild. "Do you see them?" he asks. "See who?" I'm genuinely confused now. "The lights, they're everywhere," he whispers. Then he gets back in his truck and drives off like a bat out of hell. I went back inside, shaking my head. Maybe he's just high or something, I think. But then, around 3:30 a.m., I start to feel this strange pressure in the air, like the atmosphere got thicker. The lights in the station flicker more intensely, and I hear this noise. I can't precisely describe it, but it was almost like a distant generator. But there's nothing around here that would make that sound. I try to brush it off, but the feeling doesn't go away. I keep glancing outside, expecting to see something, and then I do. Out by the edge of the gas station's light, there's this figure. At first, I think it's just another customer, but it's standing so still. I squint, trying to make it out, but it's just a dark silhouette. No face, no features, just a shadowy figure. "Hey," I shout, trying to sound brave. "We're closed for maintenance." A lame excuse, but I just want it to go away. The figure doesn't move. It's just standing there, almost like it's watching me. I'm freaked out now. I grab the phone and call my manager. It rings forever before he picks up, groggy and annoyed. "Yeah?" he grumbles. "Hey, something weird is going on here. There's this guy outside, and he's just standing there." "Is he doing anything?" he asks. "No, just standing." "Then ignore him. Probably some weirdo. Just keep an eye out." "Great, thanks for the support," I think, hanging up. I lock the doors and try to go back to my routine, but I can't shake this feeling of being watched. Every now and then I glance outside, and the figure is still there, unmoving. By 4:30 a.m., I'm on edge. I decide to check the security cameras, hoping maybe they'll show something that'll explain this. But when I rewind to the time the figure appeared, the cameras glitch out, just static and weird distortions. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that crap, but this is beyond freaky. I decide to stay in the back room until my shift ends, constantly checking my phone and the cameras. When my shift finally ends at 7 a.m., the figure's gone. I run to my car, half expecting it to follow me, but thankfully nothing happens. I drive home, hands shaking the whole way. I told my roommate about it, and he thinks I'm just sleep deprived, maybe hallucinating. But I know what I saw. I'm not sure I want to go back to work tonight, but I need the money. Has anyone else had something like this happen on a night shift? What would you do? I never thought I'd be one of those people with a crazy story, but here I am. This happened last month, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I worked the night shift at a Home Depot in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah, I know it sounds boring, but trust me, things got weird real quick. I worked the graveyard shift, which means I'm usually alone in the store from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My job mainly involves restocking shelves, organizing the back room, and dealing with the occasional late-night customer who forgot they needed something for their DIY project. And I actually prefer it over the daytime chaos. One night around 2 a.m., I was in the lumber section, stacking some plywood sheets. It was dead quiet. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash coming from the garden center. My first thought was that a raccoon or some other critter got in, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed over to check it out. As I walked through the aisles, I noticed the security cameras on the walls. I had a sudden urge to go back and check the footage, but I brushed it off. I mean, what were the chances of anything interesting being caught on camera? When I got to the garden center, I saw that a bunch of potted plants had been knocked over, dirt scattered everywhere. I sighed, thinking about the mess I'd have to clean up. But then I noticed something weird. There were footprints in the dirt. Human footprints. They looked fresh, like someone had just been there. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who the hell would be wandering around a Home Depot at 2 a.m.? I decided to check the footage after all. I went back to the security room, rewound the tape, and sure enough, there was someone in the garden center. The camera quality was shit, but I could make out a tall person wearing a hoodie. They were moving around, almost like they were looking for something. I called my manager, waking him up in the middle of the night. He He wasn't thrilled, but when I explained the situation, he told me to lock the store and call the cops, so I did. The police arrived about 20 minutes later and did a sweep of the store. They didn't find anyone, but they did see the footprints and the mess in the garden center. They took a report and told me to stay vigilant. For the next few nights, I was on edge. I kept hearing noises, but I couldn't tell if it was just my imagination or if someone was actually there. Then, one night, around 3 a.m., I was in the break room having a snack when I heard a scraping sound. It was coming from the back door, the one that leads to the loading dock. I crept over and peeked through the small window. There was a guy standing there, trying to pry the door open with a crowbar. I quietly backed away and grabbed my phone, dialing 911. I whispered to the operator what was happening, and they assured me officers were on their way. I hid behind a stack of boxes, trying to stay calm. I could hear the door creaking as the guy forced it open. Then, silence. Footsteps echoed through the store. He was inside. I texted my manager, letting him know what was going on. He told me to stay hidden until the cops arrived. Minutes felt like hours. I heard the guy moving around, knocking things over. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. Finally, I heard sirens in the distance. The guy must have heard them too, because I heard him run towards the back door. Moments later, the police stormed in. They found the guy hiding behind a shelf in the hardware section. He was arrested and taken away. Turns out, he had been living in his car and was trying to steal tools to sell for cash. The cops said I did the right thing by hiding and calling them. My manager showed up a little later, and we reviewed the footage together. It was surreal watching the guy break in and wander around the store. I couldn't believe how close I had come to confronting him. After that night, Home Depot installed better locks and added more security cameras. They even hired a security guard to patrol the store during the night shift. I kept my job, but I'm definitely more cautious now. So, yeah, that's my story. Working the night shift at Home Depot can be a lot more intense than you might think.